So this is going to be a video on how I edit my photos from the Tail of the Dragon. So the first thing that I usually do is just go through all my presets to see which one would work the best. I really like the way this one looks, but it was pretty bright and spring-like, so to speak. The trees are very green, so this just makes them look like mud. So we're going to go down to forest film, because that's what the scene, for the most part, looked like. So we're going to start with that, and it shows all the things that it does that we can fine-tune, like the tone curve and all that mess. So what I like to do is hit auto just to see what Adobe thinks it should look like, which in this case, it actually looks pretty good, so we're going to go with it. Next, I like the color profiles. It just gives the photo a different look. More often than not, I use neutral just because it makes it look flat and I can fine tune it a little more. But I like going down some of these to see what it can make it look like. But for this one, I think we're going to stick with portrait because it gives it a little more contrast without overdoing it like Vivid kind of does. So we're going to stick with that. The white balance auto usually works, but it was a cloudy day, and for whatever reason it turns it green, so I'm just going to leave it on as is and bring the color temperature up just a hair. For this one, exposure, I might bump it up just a hair. Contrast, I love just going back and forth to see what it looks like. Right there looks good. I'm going to leave highlights and shadows because this preset handles that one pretty well. Now clarity, this is where a lot of people overdo it. I've been seeing a lot of photos where the clarity is jacked all the way up and it just looks like a bad HDR. So what I usually do is I'll go negative clarity, kind of soften it a little bit. Oops. Just a little bit. Sometimes I'll use the dehaze to add a little bit of haze to it or take it away, but for right now, we're going to leave it at 0. I don't bother with vibrance and saturation because I do all the colors individually. So next is the tone curve. I don't really play too much with the little points because, I'm not a fan of it, mainly because I don't really know how to use it effectively. So I just kind of avoid it for now till I learn how to do it. But I do like using this one because it allows me to kind of fine tune the brights and the darks just a little bit. And I usually do brights being bright and darks being dark. But every now and again with the shadows, I'll bring those up just a little bit. Now the color mixer. This is one of my favorite things because I can turn the trees to be a little more green. Kind of get some of that yellow out of it and add a little more saturation. I can make them brighter, I can make it darker, but for this one, I think we're going to brighten it up just a touch. And now we're going to try and get this blue to match how it looked straight out of camera, which it looks like all I have to do is desaturate it a touch and maybe darken it a hair. And then I usually like to brighten up the yellow line just because, why not? It makes it pop a little more. So now the color grading. I just kind of play around with the luminance on this one just to add a little more or take away contrast. But for this one, shadows just a little bit, the midtones, I'm probably just gonna add a touch of brightness to it. And the highlights, probably just gonna, that looks good about there. The balance, sometimes I play with this, most of the time I don't. And the blending, since I'm not using any of the colors, it really doesn't do a whole lot. Detail, I use the same settings. I use the amount at 50 and then the masking. So on a Mac, you're going to hold down the option button. On a Windows PC, I think it's Control or Alt. I'm not sure. I haven't used one in probably 15 years. But I just like to just kind of creep it along until I get just what I want sharpened, which might be right there. So anything in white is going to have the sharpening applied to it. Anything in black is not. So that looks good right about there. This was shot at ISO 6400, 640. My dyslexia is kicking in. But my camera is great when it comes to noise performance, so I don't really worry about that. Lens corrections I always turn on because it just, well, it really doesn't make any difference now that I look at it, but it's just something I always do. Transform, sometimes I play with this, most of the time I don't. Lens blur, I skip that for now. Vignetting, I'll do that manually. Calibration, just kind of fiddling with the colors and fine-tuning them a little bit. This one, you kind of get rid of the blues. This one, you kind of add some green, red, usually the hotter colors, the warmer colors. So now that we're done with all the basic stuff, this is where the real fun comes in. So the first thing I start with is this subject, which it added this little car behind it, but it's just a sliver of it, so it's not going to matter. So what I like to do first off is add a little more detail to the car. Just a touch of contrast, a little bit of texture, a little less clarity. And that's pretty much it. It's very subtle, but it definitely works. The next thing I usually do is I will darken that background just to make the subject pop a little bit. So I always deselect the subject because we're not going to darken that at all. But I'll usually bring the shadows down just a little bit. Sometimes the exposure, but not quite. And then negative clarity just to soften it a little bit. And now, since this thing has daytime lights, I will go through and paint over them, starting there. Now if you hold shift and tap another spot, it makes a straight line to the next one. So since this is all angular, it's kind of the easiest way to do this. Maybe bring it down a little bit, just like that. Now you can change the color of this to anything, but I like pink because I rarely have pink things, so it's easier to see. So now I'm just going to do the same thing with this one. dang it. Let me just shrink it a little bit. And there we go. So now that that's there, I've already made a custom headlight setting, which it just makes them a little bit brighter and adds a little bit of a glow to it. Anytime there's headlights, I always do it. Just, it looks a little better, in my opinion. Sometimes I overdo it, like in this one, so I'll just bring the amount down to like maybe 85. Call that one a day. So next, I am going to get rid of this yellow cast on the road because the road was not yellow. So I'm just going to bring that all the way down, subtract the subject, and then I'm going to subtract most of the background with a gradient, kind of like that. Not going to worry about the trees because they're fine for now. But you see how it kind of gets rid of that yellow cast to it? And then I'll add some clarity to kind of give it a little more texture. Maybe darken it a touch and add just a little bit of blue to counteract that yellow. Kind of looks more like a road now instead of yellow. So in almost all my photos, I will add a vignette. So what I do is I just make a small one, hold Command on a Mac, and either Control or Alt on a PC. Double tap that middle one, that middle dot, and it'll full screen the thing. Since the car's in the center, I'm going to invert it. Go to the thing, the custom thing, hit darken. Let's see how that just makes the car pop a little more. So now I'm going to adjust the feathering just to kind of blend it in a little more. So now what I also like to do is to hit duplicate and invert. And then put the feathering all the way up and then lighten it. So it kind of makes the car pop a little bit. And since there's trash on the road, I'll just get rid of those right now. This one's pretty easy. Next thing, I'm going to have to get rid of that sign and both of these motorcycles, which I'll jump into Photoshop for that because it's pretty easy. So one more thing I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom all the way out on this. Make another radial. We're going to add just a hint of mist in the background. So I like to make a big circle right off a frame, maybe in top left corner or so. So we're going to zoom back in, add a little bit of dehaze, maybe that much, and a little bit of clarity. Let's see how that, it's very subtle, but it seems to work. Not going to subtract anything. So now I'm going to take this into Photoshop and we're going to get rid of that sign and both of those motorcycles. So I got the lasso on this one. So I'm just going to draw around this thing. Try and get as close as you can. This is kind of just like a rough draft. Let's go around it. Double click. Generative fill. Now, since we're not putting anything here, just hit generate. And it's going to use its witchcraft and get rid of that sign. It's super easy and it works pretty well the first time, every time. As you can see, it did a pretty good job getting rid of it. Now if we go over here, we can kind of see what it thinks. But I'm going to go with the first one because it looks the best. So now I'm going to zoom in. I guess that's as far as I can go. Now we're going to get rid of these two guys. We're going to do the same thing. Just draw around them. Double click, generative fill, hit enter. Does its witchcraft. And just like that, it's gone. Now, I don't like the way it turned the road a little bit darker, so I'm going to see which one looks best. And I'm going to go with that one. So this one might be a little tricky to get rid of number 3. But let's see how it does. I'm going to do the same thing, draw around it. Or kind of try and stay off the car as much as possible. We're going to get that mirror from the other car. Same thing, generative fill. Now it usually does a pretty good job when you're touching another object. So let's see how it does on this one. Perfect. Actually did a really good job. But I think I'm going to go with that middle one. Now let's see if we can get rid of this thing now. I'm hoping we can, because I think it's very distracting. Now, if any of you are paying for Lightroom Classic, you get access to Photoshop as well. So there's no excuse not to use this, because this is just amazing. Well, I think we're just going to leave that one in there because it didn't do a very good job. So I'm just going to delete this layer. Yes, so it's going to stay. So now I just exit out of that, hit save. And now we're going back to Lightroom. And as you can see, the sign, the motorcycles are gone. So there's one last ditch effort to try and get rid of this thing. Let's see if Lightroom can do it. Probably not, but let's give it a shot. No, that looks horrible. So yeah, it's just gonna have to stay. So that's it. That's pretty much how I do my car photos on the Dragon. Hopefully this helps some of you out. So now I'm going to export it. And that's it. It is now done. Hopefully you guys like this video.